All right, what should we talk about? Hey, how about market failures? All right, so in this chapter, we're going to talk about a market failure is not when a market ceases to exist, right? Market failures are generally instances where resources are not allocated efficiently or properly, right? So if you think of if I asked you to draw me a picture of the U.S. economy, right, and firms and government and households, and we look at there's a flow of stuff and money, and again, if that's happening efficiently and at prices and quantities that buyers and sellers are agreeing upon, great. But there are times when there's a breakdown in that, and there are also times when sometimes if you have a seller for something but no buyer, well, that's not a market. That's a market failure. Sometimes you have a buyer for something but there's no seller for it. Again, market failures. So generally, in economics, microeconomics, we kind of lump market failures into sort of four broad categories. Now, some of these I'll take my time on. Some of them I'll blow through. Kind of gloss over and blow through quickly. The first that we'll talk about is imperfectly competitive markets. Bottom line, when there's reduced or no competition in a market, in order for markets and market economies to work effectively and efficiently, there needs to be competition. Okay. Now, generally, and you'll see this in later videos that I'll do, we'll talk about sort of four market conditions, right? There's a perfectly competitive market, that's sort of number one. There's a monopolistically competitive market, and that's one that we'll talk about those later. So, it's sufficient at this point just to say that those two market structures are in fact competitive. But the other two, right, an oligopoly and monopoly are market structures where there is a problem with competition. An oligopoly, as we'll again discuss in grim detail later, is a market that's dominated by just a few, 3, 4, 5 players that have a majority of the revenue and profit in that market, right? A monopoly, of course, mono, is a market that's dominated by a single player, and in both of those cases, there's a problem because of a lack of competition. The government usually gets involved. There are certain industries like the airline industry, telecommunications, at this point even automotive, where the government, when it comes to mergers and acquisitions, the government will step in and see the concentration level and either allow or not allow mergers and acquisitions to occur if they crunch the numbers and feel like there's going to be too much of a concentration and a lack of competition, then they won't allow the merger to occur. So that's sort of the first source of market failures. And again, I just glossed over that real quick because there's going to be videos later on that are going to talk about all this in, like I said, grim detail. Okay. Now, the second source is imperfect information. Okay, so what do I mean by imperfect information? Well, let's go back to what is it? What is a market? Right, a market is a buyer and a seller that agree upon price and quantity. That's what it takes to have a market. Well, the assumption, I don't know why I'm doing this now, but is that the buyer and the seller have access to all of the same information, and that there's a sort of level playing field when it comes to information. When that's not true, there's a problem. And the term is asymmetric Asymmetric information, right? Asymmetric, one-sided. So when either the buyer or the seller has information that the other party is not privy to, there's problems. Now sometimes, it's illegal, like insider trading, right? In the stock market and things like that. If you have access to information that is not publicly disclosed and you act upon it, then you can be prosecuted and sent to jail for insider information. That's sort of the most extreme case. But sometimes it's here's a good example. Have you ever sold a car to somebody? Did you fully disclose everything that was wrong with that car? Or did you just, oh yeah, it works great. Starts every time. Oh, please start. Starts right up. You go, oh, thanks. So yeah, there are often times when, again, either the buyer or the seller doesn't fully disclose or is aware of information that the other party is not. I remember years ago reading a story about I don't know how they found out. It might have been through a metal, finder or whatever detector, but somebody realized that there may be some treasure on some property, and went and bought the property, not disclosing that there was treasure on it, and then later on I guess there was. I know that in certain states, if you know or feel or suspect that your house is haunted, that has to be disclosed when it comes time to sell the house. Okay, so there's a term. Latin term, caveat emptor, which means buyer beware. And for most of the history of sort of market or capitalism, the onus has been on the buyer to make sure that they are fully aware of all the information. And you hear stories about in the Old West, the snake oil guy would come rolling into town with his wagon, and it cures everything from baldness to bad breath to cancer. And that whole snake oil thing. Again, the burden was on the buyer to I don't know if, can you hear my cat? He's meowing. The burden was on the buyer. So caveat emptor. Okay. There have been times when the U.S. government has gotten involved, and the Federal Trade Commission in 1914 is a good example of when the government gets involved to, in this case, truth in advertising. So truth in advertising has been a law for over 100 years, but even today that still doesn't prevent, it's just crazy, absurd claims that are made by some manufacturers. And, to a certain degree, caveat emptor is still in place. If you hear something, if you hear an advertiser say something that's too good to be true, it probably is. So again, imperfect information is another source of market failures.